Late one evening, Emma stood before an antique mirror she had inherited from her grandmother. The mirror, with its ornate gold frame, looked ancient and beautiful. It had been passed down through generations, and though it was old, the glass was perfectly clear, too clear, in fact. Emma often felt as if something beyond the reflection was watching her, but she brushed it off as her imagination. It was just another late night. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Emma was tired, but as she turned off the lights to go to bed, the mirror caught her attention. She saw something that froze her in place. In the reflection, her room appeared just as it should, except there was a figure standing behind her. Slowly turning her head to look behind her, Emma found nothing, just the empty room. But when she looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, closer now. Panic rose in her chest, and her heart pounded. It was her own reflection, but something was wrong. Her reflection didn't blink. It didn't mimic her breathing. Instead, it stood motionless, staring directly at her with an eerie, hollow gaze. The reflection's eyes were slightly different too, darker, more menacing. It grinned, just a small, sinister curve of the lips. Emma stumbled back, knocking over a vase. The sound shattered the silence, but the reflection didn't flinch. It continued to watch her, its grin widening. Emma tried to calm herself down, telling herself it was just a trick of the light, stress, or exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But when she looked again, the reflection wasn't alone. There were now several shadowy figures behind her reflection, all staring directly at her. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their mouths twisted into unnatural shapes. Emma's breathing quickened as she realized the figures weren't in her room, only in the mirror. Desperate, she grabbed a blanket and threw it over the mirror, covering it completely. For a moment, there was silence, and she felt a small sense of relief. But then she heard a soft tap. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the mirror. The sound of knuckles gently rapping against glass. She stepped back, terrified, as the tapping grew louder and more persistent. The blanket slowly slid off the mirror, as if pulled by an invisible hand. The reflection was back, but this time, her double was no longer standing still. It stepped closer to the surface of the glass, pressing its hands against it, as if trying to push through. Emma's eyes widened in horror as cracks began to form on the surface of the mirror. Her reflection's hand was slowly emerging from the cracks. It grabbed the edge of the frame, pulling itself through, bit by bit. Emma screamed and ran for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Her reflection, now fully out of the mirror, stood in front of her. But it wasn't just a reflection anymore. The thing that now stood in her room looked like her, but its eyes were completely black, its skin unnaturally pale. It moved toward her with jerky, unnatural motions, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. As it got closer, its mouth opened wider, wider than a human's should be able to, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Emma backed into a corner, trembling, her mind screaming for escape. The doppelganger reached out, its icy fingers brushing against her skin. She felt the cold seep into her bones, and her vision blurred. As she lost consciousness, the last thing she saw was her reflection dragging her body toward the mirror, pulling her into the other side. The next morning, Emma's friends found her house locked, with no trace of her anywhere. All they found was the old mirror, and in it, they saw her reflection, smiling back at them, trapped forever on the other side. And now, whenever someone stood too long in front of the mirror, they too would notice something. A figure, lurking just behind them, waiting for its next victim. That night, the mirror sat silently in Emma's empty room, but it wasn't truly empty. If you looked closely, you could see her. And if you stayed too long, you might just hear the soft tapping of her fingers.